Okay, so our next step in our printing process is we need to have a frame and registration marks for our print. So I'm going to take my drawing, whether it's the original, as I have the beginnings of the design here, or my one that's in reverse, especially for those of us who have our letters. And I need to frame this. Now, when I first started sketching, I went ahead and framed this. I had mentioned that the largest our hoops are is about 8 inches in diameter, slightly over that. So I didn't want a design that didn't fit within that 8 inches. It's going to be hard to squeeze the ink through there. We have very few large frames, and a couple of students who are nearing the printing process have already claimed those frames. So you need to have your image fitting within the size of the framework we have for our screens. And as I mentioned, we're using embroidery hoops that are slightly 8 inches large. So if you haven't done this yet, this is what you need to do as your first step here. Whether you are still on paper or you have already transferred over to contact paper, you need this framework. So I have here my printed out reverse image. Now I made originally in my drawing this 7 inches big because I knew that would fit within my 8-inch embroidery hoop. So I'm going to keep to that 7 inches. Now my paper measures 8.5 by 11. So I'm going to divide that up in half, and once I have that halfway point, I'm going to determine my border here on the left and right side. So that would be 4.25 inches would be my middle. And I want half of my 7 inches to the left and half of my 7 inches to the right. So half of 7 is 3.5. So I need to go over 3.5 inches. And that's going to bring me to 3/4 of an inch from the left border. So I'm going to make that mark at the top. And if you get to one border done, in this case I'm doing my left edge, then you don't even have to use a lot of math to figure out your left border. Since I want my design to be within a 7-inch frame, since I have this border, I now only had to line up my ruler at the bottom and measure over 7 inches. Come up to the top of that pencil line, and from the pencil line over, measure 7 inches. And get my left edge. So far I have my framework left to right. I'm going to do the same thing by turning my paper a 1/4 turn. Now it's in landscape view. And this way it measures 11 inches. Half of 11 is 5.5. And I again need a 7-inch box because again I mentioned that I am making mine 7 inches by 7 inches for a frame. So again, half of 7 is 3.5. So that's going to take me to the 2. And I'm going to make those marks at the top and bottom of my page. And just like before, once I had the left border, then all I have to do from that pencil line is measure over my 7 inches. So that gives me my framework. We need this because when we do the printing process, we're going to use masking tape on the surface of our printing. So whether that's a t-shirt or a canvas or paper, we're going to physically use masking tape to create our frame. That way, anytime we go to print a new layer, we have that as one of our ways to line up our design so that every part of it matches. The next part is registration marks, and these are marks that we're going to use to help line up our design. So for these, I'm going to just mark at the halfway point. So half of 7 is 3.5. Going to do the same thing at the top. Half of 7 is 3.5. And I line them up with a ruler just to make them a little bit larger. And I want those same registration marks on my sides also. So I'm not drawing over my design with these registration marks. Again, the frame and the registration marks are just going to help me line up my design as I print layer after layer after layer. So do this on your paper first. Once you have that, then you can pull out your contact paper and apply those same frames and registrations to your contact paper. So in one of the videos you'll see where I play around with this simple design of this is a test. And once I have that on my paper, then I can line up my contact paper again to my design. And once I have that lined up, then I can take a Sharpie and I'm going to just make a mark at my registration marks. And I'm going to mark off my corners at the least. And you may want to tape this down when you do this so that your paper doesn't move as you're trying to mark this out. So I want these marks on here, and again, you can take a ruler and you can make these a little longer, make sure they're clean. And I would suggest that at the very least, you don't have to draw the whole box, but you may want at your halfways mark, your registration marks there, to add that outside border edge. Again, this will just help us in the printing process for our layers. And if you do this, then you want to make sure that you take a paper towel and clean off the edge of your ruler, because it is going to pick up a lot of that Sharpie marker, and we don't want the next person that comes in to use this to pick this up, because that Sharpie will stay surprisingly very wet still on that metal ruler. So once you have that marked, clean off your ruler. And then you'll be ready for our next step, which is applying the stencil to our screen and then printing. So that is the next step of your process. You want to do this on paper first. If you haven't already created a frame, you want to create a framework around this. You want to add registration marks at the halfway points on your framework, and you want to get those same marks on your contact paper. If you are not on the contact paper, then you want to at least do that onto your paper, so that when you get contact paper, this is all something that you can mark off and trace while tracing your layers of your design.